You're listening to the Cricket Podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Cricket Podcast, where we're going to be talking about three things today. The 100, we've got another couple of matches. Max and I were at Lord's for our first trip to the media centre. That was pretty good fun. The Women's 100 kicks off tomorrow at the Oval, and Trent Boult has stepped back from, well, effectively from international cricket. So three interesting topics and three interesting guys as well to talk about that. I'm Jack Hope. I'm joined by Max Rowe Brown. How you doing, Max?
Yeah, very good. Thank you. Surprising news, but we'll get into that in a bit.
And making a podcast debut, Matt Roller. How you doing, Matt?
Very well, thank you. Thanks very much for having me.
Max, I'm going to throw over messages to the listeners, to you.
Yeah.
Before we get into things, take it away.
Okay. Basic messages for the listeners. If you're on YouTube, like and subscribe to this video. Click the bell icon to keep up to date with what we're putting out, and we'll beat the YouTube algorithm. Get those subscribers going. I can't remember what our next target was, but more the merrier. Always the way. And at the Cricket Pod on Twitter and Instagram to follow us there on social media. And if you want to support us directly, then patreon.com/the cricket pod for access to the Discord, where we take a lot of time out of our working day to chat about cricket. Don't tell the government that. And all sorts
just
of
said
things.
it. I mean, like, come on, man.
Yeah, it's fine. None of them listen. Actually, one of them does.
Thanks, Max, for grassing us up. That's disappointing. Let's start probably with the biggest news of the day, and some absolutely sort of earth-shattering news in general for cricket, and that's Trent Boult, probably one of the few genuine top talents across the three formats of cricket in the world, stepping back from his central contract with New Zealand so that he can spend more time with his family and make himself available for domestic leagues. Max, I will ask you first before we go to Matt. I'm assuming this surprised you.
Yes, yeah, it did a bit. I mean, we're looking at someone who's one of the hot picks in IPL and has got a fantastic record particularly as a power play bowler in 2020 cricket. Is used at the death as well, but we'll gloss over that. Part of a New Zealand side, given it's the international cricket that he's likely to not be featuring in very much anymore. A New Zealand side who got to a World Cup final. Got a final of two World Cup finals, in fact. In the 50 over and the 20 over, and would be looking to go one better, I expect, in Australia in just a few months' time. So it's not only a big piece of news, quite a surprising bit of timing as well in terms of the news, and it'll be to the detriment of international cricket, I think.
Yes, their CEO David White said, "We respect Trent's position. He's been completely honest and upfront with us about his reasoning. And while we're sad to be losing him as a fully contracted player, he leaves with our best wishes and our sincere thanks." Trent's made a massive contribution to the Black Caps since his Test debut in late 2011 and is now considered one of the best multi-format cricketers in the world. We're very proud of what he's achieved. Matt, that sounds to me like it's a bit of a goodbye. So it's not an official retirement, is it? But it doesn't sound as though they're going down the pick and choose route there.
It's a really interesting decision, as you guys have said, and I think particularly so because of the fact that New Zealand have sort of had a bit of a precedent with this, in that Colin Munro, who's sort of probably a slightly different sort of caliber of player to Boult, has sort of effectively had international retirement forced upon him because of the fact that he turned down a central contract so he could play in T20 leagues. But the impression I get is that New Zealand will probably be a little bit, they've always been a pretty pragmatic board. And I think they will probably keep picking him for sort of marquee series if he makes himself available for them. So, for example, the T20 World Cup, I'd be pretty surprised if he's not involved in that in some capacity. There's not anything else going on at the same time. So the idea that they'd sort of pick their, sixth best T20 seamer in the squad ahead of him feels unlikely to me. I think personally, there's probably every chance he's played his last test, which would be quite I suppose, a significant step at the age of 33. I guess to some extent, New Zealand on this front have probably been the victims of their own success, because Boult, in winning the World Test Championship, which was such a huge thing for New Zealand, once it became evident that was going to launch in the first place, they've been building towards that for a number of years. Obviously won the first edition. There's not that much more for him to achieve as a Test cricketer. So I can sort of understand from that point of view why he would say, actually, I don't fancy a 2-test series against Sri Lanka in January. I fancy going to South Africa. But yeah, I suppose the big thing that seems to be the case from this, I think it's difficult to see Boult stepping away from international cricket and towards T20 leagues and sort of ignore the fact that he's currently contracted to an IPL franchise who have already own a team in the CPL and have just bought the rights to the PAL team in the South African League. I would be pretty surprised if at no point in the next sort of 12, 24 months we see Boult playing for PAL Royals and for Barbados Royals, because I think, Venki Mysore recently, the KKR owner, said he wanted to have a system down the line. It would be nirvana to have 12-month contracts for players of Boult's caliber who you could have for your franchise all year round and use them in all the leagues that you have teams in. So I could definitely see that being the case for Boult down the line. And yeah, for someone who, he only turned 33 last month, he's probably, he's probably somewhat on the decline, you could say, but as in, I think as we saw in his most recent test at Leeds, when he, ripped England's top order apart, he's still very much a top quality international player, even at 33 as a fast bowler. So for someone of his caliber and his standing in the game to be making this decision is, I suppose, pretty worrying in terms of from the ICC's point of view, from New Zealand's point of view, about the primacy of international cricket, and does seem to sort of be another warning sign, I suppose, for the international game, and the fact that T20 leagues will, in time, probably take over a significant chunk of the calendar, an even more significant chunk of the calendar than they already have.
Yeah, so I was going to ask a question about sort of I guess, meaning and repercussions. But you've answered some of that there. Is this basically just the next step in the slow erosion of international cricket's primacy in the sport? I mean, we've the purchase of the various franchise leagues, Ben Stokes going, Trent Boult making a very, very clear career decision here. Is that this, or is this a bloke who's 33 who's looking for a payday at the end of his career? Because there is another aspect to that. I mean, as good as Trent Boult is, he's a fast bowler who's 33. Like there aren't that many cases of guys that go on playing 3-format cricket beyond even that age with ball in hand.
Yeah, I suppose it's a tricky balance, isn't it? It's always, it feels like, because of the fact this has been such a sort of, feels like this has been a pretty big period in terms of cricket news, I suppose, in all those things you say about, the sort of land grab for that little window in January, February with the UAE and South African leagues, with Stokes' ODI retirement, all this stuff, and sort of I suppose the squeeze on the schedule that's come about through boards basically being greedy in the aftermath of the pandemic. I think it probably does feel more important because of the fact it's someone from a nation who have historically juggled the IPL and international cricket so well. So New Zealand, I think in 2008, were probably the most pragmatic board at the time, and said, if you guys need to skip a warm-up game on this tour because you need to go and play in India, but it means we can keep you as essentially a contracted player, absolutely go for it. Fine, we understand. We're not the richest board. Our central contracts aren't worth as much as England's or Australia's. You need to make your money. We need to keep you in international cricket. And they've always managed to juggle it. But the idea that you have someone who's still a first choice test player making this decision does feel quite big. I suppose, as you say, the counter argument is, how many times in the last 15 years have West Indies managed to put out a first choice white ball side? South Africa have missed, were without AB de Villiers in the 2019 World Cup, even though he probably wanted to play. Faf du Plessis in the last T20 World Cup wasn't considered available for selection when he probably, I think he's gone on record and said he would have played he'd been allowed to sort of pick and choose his tours or sort of skip certain bits of certain tours, but it's not been possible. So yeah, I suppose there's two sides of it, aren't there? Where one of them is, wow, this is a genuine, one of the few genuine multi-format fast bowlers who walks into his countryside in every format and would be close to a world 11 in most of them. Versus then the other side, which is, well, actually international cricket has been heading on this trajectory for a number of years. The number of times we've seen sort of second string sides fielded in for international games over the last decade, especially especially the last 2, 3, 4 years, it's huge. So maybe this is just another brick in the wall as it is.
And the other aspect, of course, is that he said himself, he's got a young family and wants to concentrate a lot of his time on that for obvious and understandable reasons. So whether it's as much of a sign of the decline of international cricket more than we already knew, or more, or rather the other way around, I suppose, more the rise of franchise cricket more than we already knew. I don't know. I mean, it's certainly a case of picking one over the other. But I mean, if someone gave you an option of a New Zealand central contract or some ridiculous paydays in franchise cricket, and you could only do one because the number one was the family and that was the decision you'd made, then it seems like a fairly obvious decision.
Yeah,
financially, at least.
The only thing, from a broader perspective, I've not really got a problem with a player choosing to make more money in their career like that. That's what I would do, to be quite honest.
You're off playing live golf, aren't you?
I mean, look, there are some. I've got some scruples, but the only thing that sort of struck me with the direction things seem to be heading is that we're almost heading in the direction of kind of like professional cycling, in that all of these teams essentially sponsored by a concrete manufacturer or a whiskey salesman or an investment group travel around, play 1 month of quite profitable cricket for that board in their nation, get their name out, achieve what they've got to achieve, pumping up their product, the IPL, I guess, and then move on to the next place. And then we've got a very kind of weird weird cricket calendar in general. I mean, if we assume that international cricket is trending downwards, and that it becomes what it is. I mean, like, is it an engaging product to watch Trent Boult go from nation to nation playing against the same guys in effectively meaningless tournaments to warm up for their grand tour, if you like, the IPL, which, yeah, admittedly is great. I love the IPL, but I feel like you could have quite a soulless calendar there. Is what I would say, and I think if that is the direction of travel, somebody should probably do something to arrest it. I don't know who. I'm not sure anyone actually is in charge.
Kevin Peterson.
But maybe KP will get him on the case. Max, I'm going to give you the unenviable task of talking about our title sponsor for today. So could you please let the listeners know?
Yeah, absolutely. So this episode of the Cricket Podcast is brought to you by Manscaped, the number one in men's below the belt grooming. What is it? The right tools for your family jewels, Jack? Is that the correct?
That's the slogan.
Correct slogan. There we go. So this is my first time doing that bit, so it's already drummed into me. That is the effectiveness of the advertising campaign, and with that you can get 20% off manscaped.com and free shipping using the code CricketPod. So head over there and treat yourself or your brother or your dad or a friend who might be in need of some landscaping. Yeah,
your dad. That's where you're going with that.
Why not?
Okay. All right.
It's a male relative, isn't it?
CricketPod, manscaped.com.
20% off.
It's good for your dad. Let's talk about the 100. So we've been following that quite closely. I think I've watched every game, which means I've watched more than I did last year. I've been quite enjoying it. Matt, I've spoken with Max a lot about the 100. Have you had fun so far? What are we, a week into the tournament?
I think so. I think it's definitely felt different this year. I think as we'll come on to sort of talking about the women's comp, I think it has definitely been different. The fact that it's been standalone games for a start. So I think just sort of atmospheres and grounds. I feel like, especially with a double header, I think by the sort of start of the men's game, it felt like there was a bit of an atmosphere around, and people were already there. People had already had a couple of beers for the first game. And there felt like there was a bit more of a buzz about the place at the start of a men's game, I think, last year, whereas I think this year it's sort of taken until towards the end of the first innings for that to get to that point. And I suppose it does feel a lot more like going to a Blast game, but with different teams playing when you're going to a single men's game. I think one of the things that's been really notable, I think, this year in terms of sort of how the event has been produced or whatever is all the stuff that they didn't get to do last year because of COVID. So, for example, I saw you guys at the London Spirit game on Monday night, and to a man, all of their players stayed behind and signed a whole stand's worth of autographs, took selfies with everyone afterwards, which is obviously a huge thing, is the point of this sort of engagement between players and fans. Obviously that happens at county games too, but it's sort of been pushed to a greater extent in the 100. There's also all this stuff like concourse activities that they can do in first year. So in the first year, so at the Aegeus Bowl, the concourse was filled with all these sort of soft play areas, and take a photo with whoever and do whatever you want, and more food, more drink, all this stuff. And then also I suppose the gimmicky stuff, like having Harry Kane at the toss and getting him to do a comm stint on Sky with Ravi Shastri and who was it? It's someone else. It's kind of surreal, but I suppose that this is kind of the cricketainment part of it. But for me, it should never have been the sort of focus. But I get why it's such a massive part of the tournament when they're talking about engagement and participation and bringing the game to a new audience. Because if you look at the YouTube hits on the vid of Harry Kane plinking some sixes on the outfield, and they're bigger than the highlights of the game that followed. So you get why they're trying to push it. So, but then again, there's been slightly odd stuff as well. So, for example, that was the Monday night game was Karen Pollard's 600th T20 because the 100 counts in the stats. So it was a landmark game for him. He hit 34 not out off 11 balls. I think 3 massive sixes, one over the long boundary, one into the members at the end. He was the top draft pick. It's this sort of great cricketing story in that sense for the tournament. But then if you scroll through the 100's Instagram feed the morning after, you wouldn't know it had happened. You'd know that Harry Kane had done the toss. But they've kind of, it feels like the one thing that might have happened so far is that actually, despite the fact Sky have been very keen to pump it up, the tournament itself has possibly undersold the cricketing element, where there's some really good teams, there are some really good players this year. They don't have the same issues they had last year, where all the best overseas players have pulled out. They have, Pollard versus Russell is a great storyline on Monday night, which didn't get played up to at all. But yeah, I as ever, I think it's been a mixed bag. I think it's not necessarily been helped by some fairly one-sided games, which never helps the tournament. But for example, that Oval versus London Spirit game at the Oval on, what was it, last Thursday, was that was a quality game and really felt like a proper spectacle, especially towards the end there. Yeah,
I mean, my impression of watched a lot of it is that the quality of cricket has been quite high, although on a few occasions the quality has been all on one side. We should maybe talk about the 2 matches to just a little bit of detail. Max, what happened on? Let's do. Hold on, I've forgotten what day we're on. Monday.
Let's do Monday.
First.
Monday was where we were in the Lord's Media Centre. It was London Spirit. Our pick for. Did we have them bottom?
I think we revised it. Welsh Fire play.
We revised it after seeing Welsh Fire attempts to play cricket immediately afterwards. But we had them struggling. And they were facing Manchester Originals. As you said, Matt, it was the battle of Pollard and Andre Russell, which I think is a fair point, that actually they sort of seem to have forgotten to mention these points in some of the 100s. You said the other day, Jack, didn't you? I wish there was a commentary option for I understand cricket. And they seem to have just not bothered trying to entice anyone who actually already likes cricket. They've given up on them. It's like, if you like the Blast, you'll come. If you don't like T20 cricket, you're a lost cause. So it was what we thought that London Spirit well, they made a pretty good start, didn't they? It was when Owen Morgan and Glenn Maxwell came to the crease that things really got going, and we thought they were on for a pretty big total. It got dragged back very well in the middle overs by Paul Walter with his left arm hitting the pitch. But Karen Pollard, as you said at the end, did a bit of bashing and got them up to 160, which we thought probably gave them the edge, but would be chaseable with the short boundary. But that wasn't to account for Manchester Originals completely shitting the bed, basically. From my point of view, it looked like they got completely obsessed with the short boundary. Mo Morgan and his bowlers did a very good job of trying to protect that short boundary and hiding the ball away from it. And Manchester Originals batsmen spent the entire time trying to step away and make room. And it didn't work. And they completely collapsed into a heap and made 108. And it was a pretty abject showing from the Originals batsmen, wasn't it?
They made some quite bad decisions, didn't they, through the match?
Yeah, they also sent Tristan Stubbs in at 7 for some bizarre reason.
Yeah, that I think, talking about spectacle and competitive balance and stuff like that, I think they had 3 opportunities to send in Andre Russell with a run rate over 10 and didn't do it until it was over 15. And I was like, well, come on. Like, obviously we hadn't paid to be there, but if I had paid to be there, I'd have been upset. Matt, it was a very small boundary on one side. Do you think Owen Morgan got one over on Jos Buttler a little bit, and maybe to broaden that out slightly? Does Jos Buttler struggle with the captaincy slightly? He seemed to make a few mistakes.
It was interesting for sure. Sort of watching Butler both through the summer and on Monday night. I've actually found it really interesting the extent to which Morgan sort of seems to have been haunting Butler and sort of stalking him almost, because I remember in the program notes for the first T20 International of the summer at India, Morgan wrote something along the lines of, I'm going to make sure I step back and give Jos and Matthew Mott the space that they need. I'll be on hand if they want me or anything. And then he then did the whole Sky Roadshow, did all 12 games in 25 days or something like that. And there's now, game 2 of the 100 up against him, beating him, scoring runs against his team, all this stuff. And I feel like Butler will be quite looking forward to hopefully a run of games now where he doesn't have to interact with Morgan at all, can actually have a bit of breathing space and isn't constantly seeing the guy who used to have his job. It's like a sort of, like a really annoying colleague at work who says, I'll be here.
It's the Alex Ferguson.
Yeah, basically. And yeah, well, maybe Morgan's done a Fergie as well and left behind the side that people thought was really good and maybe actually wasn't. But yeah, no, it's it has been interesting. I think it's an interesting point about the short boundary. I think there's definitely times where teams do get too obsessed with it. I thought that Spirit bowled pretty well, to be honest. And to be honest, I think the bigger issue, as I saw it, was that Manchester have they've gone in on this sort of, it feels like their strategy to the extent there is one is have lots of good players and kind of hope it sorts itself out. But if you look at that, you look at some teams in the 100 and you can really see they've tried to build a proper 11. They've tried to think pretty clearly about roles and stuff. And then Manchester, you have, Paul Walter and Tom Lammerby are the only 2 left-handers in their squad. And because of the fact they're, effectively the same player, but one of them 6 inches taller, they're never going to play on the same side. So they're only ever going to have one left-hander in the top 7. And when you play on a turning pitch at Old Trafford, that is a bit of an issue when you're thinking about left-right combinations through the middle, especially when they've ended up sending Walter up the order to try and exploit short boundaries. And then you get weird stuff like, Laurie Evans and Ashton Turner, I think, slipped down in their first game and then Stubbs at 7 in that game. So it does kind of feel weird. You've got Madsen and Evans who, they're different players, but they're effectively filling similar sort of roles at 3 and 4. And it just doesn't quite work. So effectively what happened in that game was Morgan bowled seamers from one end and took the pace off, and then bowled spinners from the other end and, basically said, try and hit these guys over that side. And they couldn't. So, it was a bit of a damn squib in the end, that run chase. But yeah, I still think Manchester will win some games because of, as I say, they have some really good players. You don't lose 8 out of 8 if you have Butler, Salt, Russell, Stubbs in your top 7. That's not going to happen. But they do need to sort of actually switch on a bit and start winning games, because it is, as we saw last year, it's a very short tournament. And while that means that you can sort of recover quite quickly from a bad start, that also means that other sides will be picking up wins. And a pretty average team, if they go on a good winning run, can make the playoffs. So,
yeah. And speaking of average teams, I'm still not really convinced that London Spirit are a good one. But with 2 wins in the bank, they're not there. But they've got at least, even if they're a bad team, they've got like a 50% shot of making the top 3 at this point. So good if you like Tyrrell's crisps. That one. Max, what happened yesterday? The game was a bit better.
Bit better yesterday. It was Trent Rockets and Northern Superchargers. We got to listen to Joe Root talking to the commentators for quite a lot of the game. That was fun. Northern Superchargers, they batted first and got off to a pretty horrendous start, losing both their openers for Ducks. And it was a back-ended chase. Back-ended, they weren't chasing. Back-ended batting effort. David Visa managing to hit 50 off 27 after being out off a no ball because Samit Patel was too lazy to get inside the circle at short fine leg, which was quite funny. And to be fair to Trent Rockets, they could have really sort of lost the plot after that, given that they let them recover from 68 to 6 and ended up posting 152. It meant they actually had some runs to chase, but David Milan came out and was the picture of calm, blasting the second highest score in the 100 ever with 88. And it was a very, very comfortable win for them in the end, and a good statement victory for Trent Rockets, who do look to be a decent side.
Max, you forget sometimes, don't you, that because it's so ridiculous that David Milan was ever ranked the number 1 T20 batter in the world, that he is actually really good. Yeah, like you kind of go, it's like he's like a mascot turned. You know what I mean. He did bat well though, didn't he?
He did bat well. Sorry, yeah. I'm sort of half doing something else. He did bat well. He was he took on the bowlers from the start. There was the intent he showed from the very beginning. Got them off to a really good power play start, and it was just comfortable all the way through. Really, anyone that came on to bowl, he took them on, and it was a supreme performance from the former number 1 T20 batsman.
Matt, is there a better or a more entertaining cult cricketer than David Visa on the circuit at the moment? Like every time I see him play, he does something good. He's massive. He's got that hair. The Namibian Dre Russ is what I was calling him on Discord yesterday. His full value. I love him.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of David Visa's. I think, as you say, he's just an entertaining cricketer to watch. Like in their first game as well, he got absolutely pumped with the ball, but then came in and got, I don't know, 15 off 6 balls or something like that at the end. And yeah, last night just absolutely moosed it as he does. And he's kind of one of those guys where I think when he declared for Namibia last year, you thought this is really going to work. Where he's probably one of the ideal guys that you could bring into a pretty average team, and is going to he's gonna properly transform it, because he does bat ball field, and he's a pretty adaptable bowler as well. I'd say obviously it's not really worked out for him so far, but he's quite good on slow pitches when he needs to be. He can bowl in the death. He's sort of, and I guess the good thing from the Superchargers point of view is the fact that as a sort of, I don't know, veteran of the franchise circuit, he's very good at coming into teams for a short period of time and, really buying into whatever the overarching idea happens to be in a particular dressing room, and kind of playing this senior leadership role. And he's great. I really like him. So yeah, I think he's a good get for them, especially. I think out of those guys in the overseas wildcard spot, he was a really smart pickup because of the fact he was always going to be available, and he's a really good player to have in the squad, because whenever someone happens to not be there, so Wahab couldn't start the tournament because of the fact he arrived late with his visa, and I think they just didn't pick him last night. He's just a great guy to slot in, because if you needed him to be your number 6 and not really bowl much, he could probably do a job for you there, and then they're using him as a sort of number 8 who bowls when they need him to, and he's pretty good in that situation as well. So yeah, good squad player, good get.
Yeah, he is. It's quite a transformation as well. He's had. I think he just wasn't very good at batting until 2019, and then got really, really good. Like it's a remarkable late career surge. Max, you said to us in the chat that you have to leave.
I do. Yeah.
Do you want to say goodbye?
I do. Great chatting with you, Matt. Thanks for coming on, and I'll leave you two to to finish things off. But
Cool.
good stuff.
Goodbye,
Cheers,
Max.
I will sit here and continue recording.
Okay, thank you. That's that is useful. Matt, we'll wrap up on the coverage of the men's bit now. You've seen every team play. Who would be your top 3 picks for the playoffs at this point?
That's a tough question. I think I'm struggling to look past Southern Brave. I don't think they're potentially maybe not quite as good as they were last year, but I think that the fact that they have a stacked batting lineup and also quite a deep squad in the terms of the number of bowling options they have means it's pretty hard to see how they won't get in the top 3 at least. I think I'm going to back Oval to get in the top 3. Obviously, they started with a defeat, but being 12 for 4 is the sort of thing that can just randomly happen once a year in a tournament. I doubt that'll happen to them again. They've got quite a big game on Thursday against the Superchargers with no Billings and no Jacks, who are both on Lions duty. But I think they're probably too good not to go through this year, having had a pretty similar squad last year and missed out by a point. And then I'll probably go Trent Rockets for the 3rd, just because of the fact they've started with 2 wins, and I'm probably, huge amount of recency bias and reading too much into it because I wasn't convinced they were that good at the start. But they have Hales Milan as the top 2 is pretty good. They have a classic sort of Andy Flower squad where they have every single role covered off, left armers, right armers, left arm spinners, finger spinners, wrist spinners, all this, pretty much everything that you could dream of they have in there, and they have a load of all-rounders, so it should be a pretty easy team to captain, and the fact that you can be incredibly flexible and versatile, and yeah, they have 2 wins from 2, so yeah, those are probably my top 3. I think I can't quite see London Spirit keeping up the start they've made, but be interested to see how they go. Birmingham, obviously a good side last year, but have I think probably got too many injuries to go through, but could surprise me. And then, the rest, can't quite see, but yeah, that's my tentative 3.
Oh no, I think that's a reasonable. Just I'm not 100% sold on Oval, but there are reasons why they could overtake at least London Spirit, I think. So, and they've got that match, haven't they, later in the year? It is a weird tournament with only 8 games that you win your first 2 and you are almost you've done so much of the hard work already. We've had a week. Matt, speaking of 8-game tournaments, the women kick off tomorrow night at the Oval. 6-game tournament for them. Are you looking forward to it? And is there anything we should look out for or expect to see in this truncated edition?
Yeah, definitely looking forward to it. I think, as I said, the sort of I think the men's tournament to an extent has actually suffered because of the lack of the women's tournament. I think the players quite liked last year having sort of being around the respective squads. I think the women's quite liked the sort of how the extent to the fact they were playing at massive stadiums in front of big crowds because of the double headers. And I think that the men also liked having the women's team around to sort of get the crowd going and also sort of bought into their success especially you look at a team like Southern Brave where both teams did really well. I think there was a genuine sense rather than just a sort of PR spiel sense of the 2 teams actually getting on and actually caring about how each other did, which was nice. I think in terms of things to look for, I suppose that the obvious point is that we're coming straight off the back of a Commonwealth Games where England have underperformed. Realistically, I think it's a strain similar to it being a 6-game 100 tournament, so it being pretty random. There's obviously an element of randomness in the Commonwealth Games. England absolutely hammered New Zealand in the group stage and then bombed in the bronze medal match. But what it does mean, especially with a new England coach coming in pretty soon, because Lisa Keightley's off at the end of the season, it does mean that there's going to be opportunities for players to sort of stake their case over their team's 6 games. I think we've already seen the extent to which 100 performances last year really did make a massive difference in terms of certain players' career trajectories. I mean, very difficult to see Alice Capsey, for example, having played international cricket this summer, if not for the 100 last year. So I think there's definitely a good chance for that. And I think the other big thing is that the quality of overseas players is so much higher this year in the women's game. You look at some of the sides, just sort of previewing it yesterday, I was looking through, and Northern Superchargers are probably going to have Elisa Healy, Laura Wolfart and Jemima Rodriguez as their top 3, which is, sort of Dream 11 type stuff. So I think that's hopefully going to be a big lift, because last year, due to travel restrictions, all the obvious factors, there was quite a big dip in terms of it missing the best players in the world. Whereas now, with the odd exception, pretty much all the big draw cards seem to be involved this year, which I think is really positive.
Yeah, I think it's going to be an exceptional tournament. I'm really looking forward to it. I'll be along tomorrow to check it out. We have to go and do our lives now. So Matt, thank you very much for joining us. Is there anything that you want to plug, or do you want to let people know where they can find you on the internet, I presume, or in real life?
Just on the internet's great. Fine with no one coming out to me in real life. But yeah, just follow me on Twitter, mroller98. That should be pretty much all you need to do.
Cool. And if you want to support the show, check the show notes for information about Manscaped, our sponsor for this one, and patreon.com/the cricket pod. Catch you later.
You're listening to the Cricket Podcast.